Good afternoon. Like everybody else, I'd like to add my welcome to all of you to the 2020 Board of Directors meeting. Truly a first for all of us. Even for those of us who have had many BODs under our belts, this is truly unique. I'd also like to add my welcome to those who were elected during the 2 years since our last BOD, as well as some new carriers that have joined. Sky Regional, who joined us just 1 month after our last BOD, as well as fellow Canadian carriers Provincial, Perimeter, and Air Borealis, PAL Aerospace, and Morningstar Air Express. Unique is one way to describe this meeting and the situation we are all going through. Not since 1918 have we seen a worldwide pandemic such as this one, and unfortunately, we can't benefit from the lessons learned from back then. So we are forging a new path to restore our industry, not just for ourselves, but for those who will follow. Nearly 90 years after the inception of this union, we remain the pioneers of the profession, combating every new challenge and circumstance that comes our way, and we've proven our resiliency. And speaking from history, we are uniquely suited to weather the tough times we're experiencing, specifically because of the hard and thoughtful work of the volunteers like all of you, and during the good times, and the meticulous and careful work during the bad times. As at past BODs, ALPA leaders have emphasized conservative budgeting, and you all listened and followed through. We knew then that there would be tough times at some point, so we acted responsibly. We built up our reserves, we recapitalized our war chest, and all the while spending responsibly to make needed infrastructure updates as well. That's provided us with welcome assistance as we make our through the financial issues this crisis brings. You'll see as we go through the numbers that our finances have remained relatively strong through 2020 for a variety of reasons that I'll touch on later. We've also been very flexible in producing the 2021 budget, constantly adjusting as the outside world adjusted and making sure we were working with the most up-to-date numbers. Things are still changing every day, and we remain committed to the flexible approach. Each of you here, I'm sure, are dealing with the same issues locally with your MECs. I encourage you to continue your conservative approach, and I urge you to remain flexible so that when situations change for the better, we can react. So here are our financial results from 2019, which provided ALPA with more than $75 million in net income. That's a direct result of our conservative budgeting, along with an extremely strong year in the industry. This was exactly the buffer we needed heading into 2020. This year so far, as of August 31st, while not as strong as we originally projected, is only a bit lower. We've generated an operating surplus of $65.8 million thus far, primarily because our spending has slowed dramatically while our revenue has held steady as the CARES Act forestalled furloughs until October 1st, as well as furlough mitigation negotiations at some MECs that took us beyond October 1st. As of today, we are financially sound and able to provide our members the vital resources they need. You heard Captains DePete, Fox, and Couette all talk about the tailored resources we made available to our members through our pilot volunteers and supporting staff. It's truly been a remarkable effort. That's also reflected here with the Administrative and Support Account, or A&S. Not only have we received more income than was expected, but we are also greatly reduced our expenses. Quite simply, the nature of the pandemic has kept costs down. For example, virtual meetings like this one have reduced the overall cost of typical expenditures that come along with in-person meetings: hotels, flight pay loss, staff travel, and more. We've displayed this slide at the last Board of Directors meetings as well, and adding 2019 and 2020 makes it even more impressive. Again, the thing I want to highlight here is that we've used these funds conservatively and put ourselves in the best position possible for our current situation with a healthy surplus. This one slide perhaps is the best evidence of how ALPA as a whole has been able to rebuild and recapitalize through sound financial judgment and helps prepare us for the pandemic. We first showed this slide in 2018 to demonstrate the improvements in just 6 years. And in just 2 years after, we've added to those improvements tremendously. In addition to the increase in the MEC cumulative balance, this chart shows continued emphasis on recapitalizing both our OCF and MCF, the Major Contingency Fund. Both of these funds have increased greatly in just 2 years, reflecting the priority ALPA has placed on them. Part of the reason we've been able to recapitalize these various accounts has been due in no small part on how we view dues income. This slide shows our philosophy of estimating dues, which is the cornerstone for our budget building process, and has yielded higher than expected dues revenue and therefore creating a surplus to be used later. As I mentioned earlier, 2020 has remained relatively strong financially. Our thoughtful budgeting combined with our efforts undertaken by our MECs, our airlines, and our governments have kept our dues revenue trending at or slightly above budget. We are also particularly fortunate to have received higher than expected profit sharing revenue in the first quarter of 2020. As you can see, the anticipated profit sharing spike in February was even more significant as 2019 airline performance was considerably better than expected. For the balance of the year, the initial of COVID-19 were starting to creep into the dues revenue, but again, not to a significant degree. On a cumulative basis, though, those strong profit sharing payments have allowed actual dues revenue to keep pace with our estimates. As I said earlier, the nature of the pandemic has kept costs down, as you can clearly see here. And as the year progressed, travel restrictions and virtual meetings have had a huge impact on monthly expenses. And with monthly expenses consistently below a budget, that provides us with a year-to-date actual total well below our budgeted amount. So now let's look at the 2021 budget. As a reminder, after all the off-the-top expenses are removed, the remaining dues revenue is allocated based on the spending limit formula shown here. So according to that formula, here are the budgeted numbers for 2021. You can see off to the right, the off-the-top figures for the MCF, OCF, Canada Board, and the magazine. And on the left is the breakdown of the remaining funds. Here too is a breakdown of the A&S budget, the largest portion of our budget each year. Because it was such a different process, I'd like to take some time to discuss the 2021 budget and explain why. Next to safety, our union's #1 priority has always been to serve our members and to continue providing them the essential resources that they need. But now the reality of voluntary leave programs and furloughs looms across our profession and ultimately decreases our revenue, so we needed to significantly cut our expenses as we move into 2021 in order to continue. ALPA's national budget reflects how COVID has affected the aviation industry to date. We have gathered the most up-to-date information from our carriers in building this budget. How many pilots would take an early out? How would furlough mitigation strategies play out at the negotiating table? How many pilots would be forced into involuntary leaves? And how does that all change their ALPA status? And unfortunately, as was mentioned earlier, the sad closing of ExpressJet has added to this discussion as well. For 2021, we currently anticipate dues revenue to be down about 25%. Our initial assessment projected a larger decrease, and we requested national committees and departments to cut their budget by about 30%. However, as the financial landscape changed over the past few months, we were able to adjust all the budgets to reflect an overall percent reduction from 25% reduction from 2020. While we have not cut salaries or staff positions, travel is the second biggest expense for all departments, and we were able to significantly reduce this line item. More specifically, because of state and local restrictions, we have been able to reduce travel expenses for both staff and pilot volunteers by postponing or limiting in-person meeting events. These changes have a rippling effect throughout our association as well as our budget. Overall, these changes will require a shift in how we have all become accustomed to operating. For instance, if your MEC is used to having multiple staff members routinely attend meetings in person or visit your MEC offices, that level of travel may not be able to continue in 2021 for both budgetary reasons and also to keep the safety and well-being of our staff in mind. Some of the other reductions include reduction in department subscriptions, no new investment project for IT and finance. If ALPA funding has been reduced, the budget does not accrue for the 2022 BOD. Executive Board, Executive Council, and EVB group spending has been reduced. Initiatives that were new in 2020 were not continued. And committees, again, were generally reduced by 25%, except in special circumstances. Being flexible as an association remains key to this budget. When I look at that list, the optimist in me sees spending priorities for whenever circumstances turn around. Should the airline industry bounce back quicker than expected and our revenue increases above budget, we have a checklist of projects and priorities ready for funding. I encourage all of you to have that same outlook and continue to plan for the future. We will all need to work together to adapt to this new model. I encourage each of you to reach out to me and my team throughout the upcoming year if you have any questions, issues, or concerns. Next, I want to talk to you about the work done by the Structured Services and Finance Review Committee, or SAFER. To start, I want to thank the people listed on this slide for their time and expertise, as well as those in the finance department who have contributed to the discussion. This entire group came to each and every meeting prepared, engaged, and ready to tackle a list of problems that at times seemed to never stop growing. It was truly my privilege to chair this committee. As you're well aware, the Board of Directors in 2018 voted to reduce member dues from 1.9% to 1.85%, starting on January 1st, 2020. Accompanying that change was the establishment of the SAFER Committee to look at how ALPA spends our money and how we can improve the process. Initially, the committee was given 4 main focus areas: the size of the MCF and OCF, allocations to the 4 buckets in the spending limit policy, funding of national committees, and procurement policies. Some of the changes that have already been implemented thanks to committee recommendations include increased funding for national committees for volunteer expenses, taking that cost off the plate of the MECs, increased funding for MECs to send pilots to national training events, requiring MECs to officially define the value of a day in order to standardize flight pay loss reimbursement, and increasing reimbursement and procurement limits to keep with national trends. I ask you to note that all of these were implemented prior to the pandemic, but during the budgeting process, some have not been funded for 2021, but will remain on the books and with the intention of continuing them once we come out on the other side. Finally, I'd like to briefly discuss a SAFER issue that is before the Board of Directors this week: the dues policy concerning 401A17 spillover amounts. As you know, employer contributions put into retirement accounts are not duesable. However, due to IRS limits, the amount that employees can put into these accounts annually creates an issue of what to do with that money that exceeds the limit. Several CBAs specify that employment retirement contributions that exceed IRS limits can flow into qualified retirement plans and therefore not duesable, while other pilot groups don't have that option. About 6 years ago, ALPA discovered that groups that had no qualified vehicle for spillover were not being treated equally in regard to how the overflow income was being duesed. About a year ago, the matter was then sent to the SAFER Committee to discuss. During that time, the collection of dues on these amounts at all airlines was suspended. SAFER concluded that under current ALPA policy, these excess funds are in fact duesable. However, the committee recommended to the Executive Council continue to suspend the dues collections on these amounts until the matter could come before the Board of Directors for a decision. We'll have more conversation about this in Delegate Committee 1. It wasn't that long ago that I was sitting in your seats attending a BOD as a delegate. This is actually my first board as a national officer. As 2020 began, I was reviewing my calendar for the events ahead of me for the year, and I was truly looking forward to this BOD. I saw it as an opportunity for us to be all together and for me to spend time with the MECs to answer questions, hear your concerns, and to explore your ideas. I hope that before the next BOD we have that opportunity. As I said at the start, this BOD is rather unique. So too are the circumstances we find ourselves. What's not unique, however, is our response. We have seen time and time again over the years how ALPA has responded to a crisis. And I've shown you our long-standing fiscal philosophy has prepared us so we could respond. As pilots, we train all the time for that unexpected failure, so when it happens, we can react and see it to a successful conclusion. ALPA Finance is no different. During the good times, we not only expanded, but streamlined and stood ready for that unexpected failure. We are conservative, but flexible. We are forward-thinking and currently focused. ALPA will remain strong because of each of you and the pilots you represent. Enjoy this BOD, and as always, proceed with caution when you go to the Canadian Hospitality Suite. And I look forward to seeing you all very soon. Thank you.